Welcome to Canterbury Trails, a weekly walk through the faith and culture of our Anglo heritage.
O Lord, our Heavenly Father,
England is first and foremost for us a home.
That which we are.
Forth now, fear no darkness.
One equal temper of heroic hearts.
grant that all our doings may be ordered by thy governance.
It's the man who's only thinking about doing a good job or telling the truth who becomes really original.
Made weak by time and fate, but strong in will.
And then all the host of Rohan burst into song, for the joy of battle was on them.
To strive, to seek, to find.
Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
And not to yield.
You have got to be happy in those quiet moments when you remember that you are alive.
Amen.
Welcome to another episode of Canterbury Trails. My name is CJ Engel, and with me is my co-host Jared Lovell. Today we are talking about C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, of course, is a major figure in modern Christendom. He is an Anglican, and of course he fits right in with the English tradition in so many different ways. He was a literary scholar, a public theologian of sorts, and so many times people all across the world come to him for lifelong wisdom. So we're really honored to be talking about this. And odds are this will not be our last C.S. Lewis. There's so many things about him and his contributions. We're probably going to focus on one particular area of his thought today, but there's so much more about him. So with us to discuss this is Micah Lovell. So Michael, thank you for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe, and also like what drew you to C.S. Lewis in the first place?
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me be on. Am I the first guest that you've had?
You're the second guest.
All right.
So but you were the first guest, but you had to reschedule. How's that?
So I'm the second guest, and this is appropriate because I'm the second born of my family. So Jared is my brother. I don't know if that's the most interesting fact about me, but we are brothers, and I came to C.S. Lewis through his fiction. I am an educator, mostly of younger students, grammar school students, and middle school students, and I'm always interested in children's literature. I have a shelf like this right next to me, and a shelf like that right over here, full of just children's literature. And I'm always looking at new things and trying to see what's out in the world today. And of course, most children have been exposed to the Chronicles of Narnia, if not through The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, maybe through the whole series. Maybe parents read it to them. And I had some exposure to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a child, but I wouldn't have said that I was a connoisseur of Lewis. But then growing in my own desire to read great books, I found Narnia and found a love of books, a series that I would read again and again each year. And then eventually I found my love and desire for classical education, and it's there that I read some of Lewis's other works, The Abolition of Man in particular, and that helped shape my worldview deeply. But I would still say I trace my connection to Lewis back through Narnia, and I was fortunate enough to be given a gift of a book a decade ago or so by Michael Ward called Planet Narnia, which showed an underbelly of a structure of which I had not seen and had not noticed, and had not even, in fact, been educated by in my entire life. And this opened worlds within Lewis for me, and then that spurned a love and desire to read his other works, including some of his more academic works, and find what other things he was hiding within his novels, but also in his common way of communicating with people.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis is fascinating because a lot of people, they'll just approach him. And this is so funny. Like, I tell my wife this all the time, that someone like C.S. Lewis is very popular among the, like, bourgeois, suburban, like, homeschooling mom. They have no idea, like, how much he would have despised, like, the American consumerist society, that like all of us basically grew up in, not out of anything bad of, our parents, but that's just the world that surrounds us. And C.S. Lewis's mind did not exist in this century. He existed in an entirely different metaphysical paradigm. And it's from that paradigm that he was able to communicate some of these things. It's almost like he was standing in a different world, and Narnia was the product of him trying to communicate that back down to earth. That's kind of what people need to understand about C.S. Lewis, is he had like a different world from which he wrote. In that world, basically, he spent a lifetime trying to communicate some of these things back to modern Western man. And, I think a lot of people miss that. And of course, things like the Chronicles of Narnia, I'm stealing all your thunder here, but things like the Chronicles of Narnia are great introductories, but there's something so far beyond, what people can, understand on the surface level of Narnia. So maybe let's start there, since you're into literature and children's literature. What else was going on there in Narnia and in the imagination there that really is him trying to communicate something that is not natural to our current, cultural environment?
Yeah, I mean, thunder, free to steal at any time, but the Lewisian perspective, as you said, is somewhat otherworldly, because he himself, though appealing to the suburban wine mom, also has this very curmudgeonly, maybe not as curmudgeonly as Russell Kirk or Chesterton, maybe not to that level, but he has a touch of that, and he's really a medievalist. That's what he's that at his core. And so, as you said, he's not American. This is kind of a side note, but his marriage to Joy Davidman was a shocker to all parties involved, probably even to Davidman herself. No one really knew about that relationship. He kind of was very closed off about that part of his life. And American culture in general, he saw himself as having to relearn English in order to speak to them in a way. Not a fault of his per se, but a fault of theirs. And you're right about being able to speak to members of a different culture, though we spoke the same language. But his language is medieval, and he was a medieval scholar. That was his bread and butter. And then the novels flow out of the person, but they were trying to bring medievalism to a popular culture. And so a children's story where he could employ some of that structure was a way to communicate to people who had otherwise lost the ability to understand the world in the way that medievals, an uneducated, an illiterate person of even a few hundred years before, could understand. Mm-hmm. And so that's where he, I think, is trying to communicate in a way that people can understand, but talk about something that was just basic truth, just yesterday.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could take a step further from medievalism, narrow it down a little further to the Anglo tradition. Last year I read Alistair McGrath's biography of Lewis, and McGrath talks about in his early life, if I could just quote a piece from McGrath, he says, were some Irish writers, because he's talking about his early life in Ireland, where some Irish writers found their literary inspiration in the political and cultural issues surrounding their nation's quest for independence from Great Britain, Lewis found his primarily in the landscapes of Ireland. And he goes on to describe those rolling hills and those landscapes that formed Lewis's imagination. And you can see them depicted later in Lewis's descriptions of Narnia. Furthermore, he talks about the fact that he grew up in a place where they had a huge library. There were books all around, and even if Lewis was not reading all of them, this also spoke to his imagination. It created worlds of possibility, imagination in fantasy stories. And finally, McGrath writes, he says, Ireland is the Emerald Isle precisely on account of its high levels of rainfall and mist, which ensure moist soils and lush green grass. It was natural for Lewis to later transfer this sense of confinement by rain to 4 young children trapped in an elderly professor's house, unable to explore outside because of a steady rain falling so thick that when you looked out of the window you could see neither the mountains nor the woods nor even the stream in the garden. And so he talks about the link between the formative years of Lewis's childhood and how those scenes are then later depicted in his novel. So wonder if you could go into a little more detail about that in terms of how is the imagination formed, and how Lewis's imagination in particular was formed, the Celtic Anglo world in which he grew up, how that bore fruit, and the earthiness of that place, how it transfers into his literary imagination.
Yeah, I find Lewis's language to be largely earth-bound, and that is, as you said, it's part of your environment. I mean, we learn by everything, all that's around us, and like the walls of the room that you're in communicate something to you too. It's why aesthetics are such an important aspect of the school, the classroom, the home, because everything around you is communicating. Well, so Lewis, of course, growing up in, as McGrath pictures there, that type of landscape, of course, he's going to import some of those same ideas, and those mental images are going to be the lasting ones that he's going to associate with various emotions and feelings. And also, the imagination is given life by exposure to the outside world as well as the inside world. And Lewis's reading alone contained Englishmen in traditions of which he would import, but then he would also take those and twist them a little bit to his own making, rewrite them, paraphrase them, and then send them back out. And so growing up with books that, say, like in the English tradition, you have Spenser, that, and John Bunyan, whose Pilgrim's Progress he sort of does a retelling of in the Pilgrim's Regress. He's doing variations of these books, these experiences, these exposures that he's had, and then he's kind of returning them. And this itself is connected to what I mentioned before, sort of medievalism, the idea that there's a framework or a structure on which things can be put and built. Layers of paint can be added and touched up on top of a structure that's already there, because the structure is doing some of that communicating for you. And so England as an idea, even, that's something that Lewis gets into quite a bit in That Hideous Strength, one of the books in the Ransom trilogy. And we can probably talk more about that later, but a lot of what happens in that book is connected to Arthur, this huge legend, obviously, in England, and Lewis has that in his bones. And so that is going to come out in various places in the Narnia and most heavily in That Hideous Strength. So both what he reads and then what he does with it, going outside and being part of that. I mean, the English references alone in Narnia are incredibly overpowering. The landscape, as you said, is a reflection of Britain itself. The Narnia landscape is. It's pastoral. The countryside, under attack from forces from outside. The haunted wood. This goes back to European fairy tales, from which you have even George MacDonald, the one that Lewis credits with baptizing his imagination. MacDonald was a student of German fairy tales and studied them and then wrote some of his own, including Fantastes. And so there's a big MacDonald European fairy tale connection there with woods and important events that happen in woods. Narnian society, that mirrors the English sense of society. You know, you have the elements of hospitality. In English society, hospitality, etiquette, and manners reign supreme. The ill-mannered or the ill-tempered, they get noted for their disrespect of custom. This is always pointing that out. Those who are ill-mannered, they are commented on about how they're breaking with the tradition of how one ought to behave in certain situations. The beavers in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the way that they treat a guest. A guest is a person of honor. And so that idea just runs throughout his writing. And that's a particularly English idea of hospitality. The hearth and the home, another aspect that's in Narnia and other works. The hearth is the gathering point, the center of idyllic family life. And in medieval and Christian families, the hearth is not only the literal source of warmth, it's also a kind of spiritual center. It's the place where the family would gather, where values were passed down, where the home and its roles are even defined. And the Beavers have a strong sense of that as well. But also, I think another English aspect of Lewis's writing is the presence of hierarchy. In Narnia, the Pevensies they're monarchs. They live in a castle. Throughout, feasts are given by the sovereign leaders of the nations. And feasts sort of symbolically retain all of those elements. I think what we talked about, hospitality, the offering of food to another, the hearth in the home, opening one's home or property up to others, with order, and then the kind of hierarchy, the master, the host of the party, they give a blessing. They invite people in. They're the sort of master of ceremonies. And so Narnia is kind of run through with this presence of English style, not just English landscapes, but those are also prevalent.
Yeah, I've learned to appreciate that fact about I want to say Lewis, but just Narnia as a world, that it really is an English world. It's characterized by like Anglican cultural structures. Even the things that draw the reader in as a child, the things that are meant to entice the child and say this is a good thing about this situation. Those are the English things. These are the things probably that he draws from his childhood. I would imagine, like, you can just picture, Christmas time at Oxford, and this is really the thing. This is the fountain that he's drawing on.
Yeah, I appreciate too. The more I've read, I taught through 2 Lewis books already this year, and some of those references do keep popping out to me in ways that I've only come to understand once expanding my own literature levels, including getting into Austen. You can see lots of allusions and references to Austen, Dickens. But my favorite discovery, I guess, in reading through Narnia lately is finding all of the hardcore Anglos in those books. Like, there are actual presentations of real English people there. And if you know, in The Silver Chair, Puddleglum is sort of this prototypical grumbler, sarcastic, glum, but also he's got that kind of unwavering English spirit, that sense of duty. You just kind of put your head down and go forward. And Frank, the cabbie from The Magician's Nephew, is kind of like a lost figure a little bit. He's only in a handful of chapters in that book. He's not a prominent figure in the beginning. He kind of stumbles there in the end, and he finds his way into Narnia, and then eventually becomes the first king. He's a cabbie in London, Cockney, and he, initially is kind of played up for laughs, but he is the stabilizing force once they go back, and so stabilizing and so stable that he's named the first king. And he, in London, he's just this working class man, but he displays in the midst of, traveling to another world, this sense of, being good-mannered. How do you treat another person? And has a very simple piety. Like, he claims, I've not been to church as much as I should have, but in times like these, I feel like the thing that's the most important thing to do is that we should just actually pray. He also just stands and observes situations. He doesn't just immediately react to them. He wants to take in what's there. There's tons of these characters. Reba Cheap from Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he's got the kind of the chivalric traditionalist aspect too, and Anglo in its own right. Nobility, code of honor, and all that. Lewis is touching back on that tradition as well, but it's fun to find his presentations of English life and culture embodied in those stories. I have been having a lot of fun with that.
You mentioned a few moments ago about the hierarchy aspect, and that is comes through in all of Lewis's writings. So I want to lean on that a little further. Could these kinds of works have been written without the let's see, I'm trying to be delicate in how I say this, but I guess I'll just come out. Could a low church evangelical or egalitarian, non-denominational egalitarian, from America today, the people that appreciate his work so much, could they have produced this kind of work? Or is there something in the Anglican tradition, the Church of England, that makes a work like this possible?
That's an interesting way. I don't think, to answer the first part, I don't think that there's any way that someone not raised in Lewis's own situation, something in, say, you said a reader of Lewis today, with the evangelical background, just to use that word, I don't see how they could produce works which are, one, this clear, but also that are subtle. And it's a subtle Anglican presence. It's a subtle hierarchy. It's not coming at you like, a hawk screeching in. It's the way that it is sort of like the gears that spin the wheels. It's like a part of life, and that, I think that would be the way that he would describe it. I think that is probably something that's also it's English, Celtic as well, in that it's just you kind of go about your work. Even his own Anglican background. He was a lay person. He wasn't a clergyman, and he saw the work of being in the prayer book and following the liturgy, and then also he was a traditionalist about the liturgy too. He did not like extempore modifications. He said that everything that happens on the in the liturgy should reflect what we've had in the creeds and what we've had in the catechism, and that there shouldn't be moments where people are trying to do something fresh and new with that this is too unstabilizing to the parishioner in the pews who has not been educated in these things, knows his creed and he knows his catechism, but he doesn't know much else. And then if now someone's going to introduce a new theological idea and that person is celebrating up in the front, now they're going to be unmoored from a base of which they know what they think they know and what they don't know. And so even that, he was kind of a kind of put your head down, that kind of keep calm and carry on sort of way. And I think in the sense that we are very adaptive American idealism, I guess, is that we're so creative and flexible, just learn to code, and we just go on to the next thing. That's not the way that Lewis is really wired, and it's not the way I think humans really are, that we just snap off of one thing and go another direction. That your basis, the thing that you've been kind of raised up to be, that's sort of who you are. Those early influences, your faith, the books that you've read, the things that you've internalized, those are what carry you through, especially in difficult times and war-torn times. Those are the things that move you forward. And then when theological developments happen, when the world is changing around you, those you lean on, and those are the things that help carry you through. You're not always looking to react or respond to whatever new thing is flying at you. You're going to keep looking back to what's already there, rather than what other direction can we take this now that this new stimuli has come into our field.
It's funny because just rereading the series again with my children, there's a sense of nobility that the children have given their stations, right? They're kings and queens, and that has a certain significance about the duties that they have to their realm, right? That it's not even really about them. It's about the fact that they are there with obligations, and that there's something respectable about being in a position of authority. Like, contrast the message that Lewis is giving there with, I'm going to be a little exaggeratory here, but like take a kid's book that's, popular in my old circles called the Tuttle Twins series. And like the heroes of those books are the ones that like are seeking profits, and they're the ones that are coming up with like new ways to make like consumer goods. And it's like everything just seems so cheap and constantly in flux, like what you were saying. No sense of higher ideals or anything like that just completely saturates Lewis's paradigm.
Yeah, that's a great observation, because even within the family themselves, the Pevensey children, they all sovereigns, but all fit within the hierarchy of the family. Mm-hmm. Peter's going to occupy his role because as the eldest, that's his right to even oversee, though the four co-reign together. Susan and Lucy are going to serve in ways befitting of queens. They're not going to try to usurp or serve as kings, and so there is this even sense
fight in war, right?
Right, or even fight in war. Right, there's a sort of interior hierarchy that exists within it. It's layers upon layers of this, but it's like you said, it's sort of ingrained. Like if anyone's going to write a story about children discovering a new world today and find out that they are actually meant to be the sovereign rulers of it, it's going to be a girl boss story. You just know that it is, and that's not like that wouldn't make sense to anyone in Lewis's world 50 years, 60, 70 years ago. It wouldn't make any sense that would be the way things are, because things have a certain pattern to it. It's not to say that there weren't great queens of the past. Of course there were. Lewis not loved, but he had a great amount of respect for Victoria. So like that, there are possibilities for women to have positions of authority, but that's not going to be the natural order of things, all other things considered. Yeah, there's no way that some of the things that he wrote then would come out of people who have been inculcated with Lewisian fiction, or even some of his nonfiction writing. They would not still produce that because of how they've been shaped by all these other parts of their lives.
Yeah. So one of the things that you were talking to us about before we did this was this idea of the West as a chasm. A chasm between what? I mean, and that's it's interesting in and of itself. We mentioned medievalism before, but you talk about the West as standing before a chasm between medievalism and modernity, basically. So maybe like draw on that thread a little bit. Like, what do you mean by that, and why is it important for understanding Lewis?
Do you guys know about that meme that was essentially started by Jeremy Tate? Do you know Jeremy Tate? He's with the it's beside the point. He's a modern. He's on. He's the Catholic writer behind the Catholic school movement. Do you know that meme? I've probably seen iterations of it. There's some great iterations of it. He tweeted years ago that he and his father-in-law is a builder of some kind. I don't know if he's an architect or what, but they were going and visiting these cathedrals, and he asked his father-in-law, like, why don't we build? The kind of question that other people say. You walk into a cathedral and you look up and you just say, like, why don't we build things like this anymore? And his father-in-law's answer was, well, we can't. We don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And this has spawned some great other responses, like kind of like your traditional, like, go to your average city where you have on the outskirts, you have this strip of land and it's got Chipotle on this side and McDonald's on this side and, your huge gas station over here and your shopping mall. And then say like, well, why can't, and there's people have done like the meme of that and they're like, it's because we don't know how to do this anymore. Why does the world not look like this anymore? Like it did, 20 years ago. Well, we've lost the ability to do it. But at the heart of it, there's that kernel of truth that there's like a sort of the knowledge barrier was too great. I think that like for instance, regarding to we said the West as sort of a chasm. Like Lewis sees a sort of deficiency that has come about in people of his day, 70, 80 years ago, 90 years ago now, that was 100 years in the unmaking. And so he said that we actually can't even really reach our audience. We can't reach our people because they don't even have like the foundation to build upon with the ideas that we're trying to build them up, and they don't even have the foundation of which you can put anything solid. So you're putting something on something that's not there. And modern educators, even I work as an educator in a classical Christian environment, and a lot of times we do get students who come in from outside, and that's kind of what it's like too. When they join into this, you're seeing there's this lack of skills that should have been developed early in life. They don't have any of that. He saw the kind of whole world as that. He's and let's be honest, he's a professional academic. He's an actual tweed. So he really has, he's got students coming in who are supposed to be the best of the best coming into these great institutions, and he's saying even they were lacking sort of this basic knowledge of how the world works. And so he says we're at a place where essentially we've lost the ability to ourselves know how to see what there is to be seen. And all that we can do at this point is sort of now cut off what's there and go back to an earlier time. We've broken from our medieval heritage, and now what we've done is we've replaced that with Enlightenment thinking, and then that led to this sort of this great loss of which now to talk about just sort of common things, you can't get any traction. And I think about that in the terms of like the building. How can you? Why are no cathedrals built anymore? It's because we don't know how. There's a lack of knowledge. There's other reasons, of course, but there's a lack of the vernacular of even how to do it, that you couldn't even explain what you wanted. If you wanted a cathedral, you wouldn't even know the terms of all the elements of what are inside of there to describe to an architect of what you actually want. And he says that's because the last 100 years we've been cutting off our legs. Yeah. And now we should go back and figure out where we left them, and let's start building from there.
It's funny because, today in our time, depression rates are at all-time high, and we have all of these consumer goods we're just drowning in them, right? And these are often described as like the triumph of humankind, and yet there's just so much emptiness and depression and bickering and fighting, and families are not together, and individuals have no direction in life, and kids don't even know their parents, and all of these, in his age, this would have been considered hell. Like this was hellish, and the problem for him was literally that we chose the wrong side of the canyon. There was this chasm, and we picked our path. And he would not be surprised by any of this today. He would not be surprised by the fact that 70% of women over the age of 40 are on some sort of antidepressant. That's insane. This is not progress. And Lewis would have been surprised by nothing. And I think this is one of the ways that he used literature, was to draw back our imaginations and say, yes, we'd have to sacrifice the promises that we've told ourselves as 20th century human beings. We'd have to lay those on the altar, but there is a better way of living. And I think that's one of the messages that comes across in all of his fiction, and not only his fiction, but this is why people come to him and they can draw from his fountain, because he did recognize the fact that you are missing something in your life. And this model that's been desecrated by the academy, politicians, media entertainment, the American propaganda, all of that, they're missing the good things in life that Western society should remember that we once had.
Yes, if you've read the Ransom trilogy, especially that Hideous Strength, and if you've read probably, maybe I would say Lewis's greatest piece of fiction. I know it's debatable now at this point, but probably his most powerful contribution to fiction is Till We Have Faces. And you read the way that he writes Jane in that Hideous Strength, and Orwell, the central figure of Till We Have Faces. He is writing, in both cases, two sides of the coin of like you said, the modern American woman in her late 20s to late 30s, like that is what is coming through. That person didn't exist, I don't think, when he wrote it. It was prescient. It was talking about, as you said, a kind of world that would be the outcome if certain decisions or life choices were made. This is where it would go, and it's. I mean, I'm not there, but it's almost scary to see people that you would recognize from your own life, but so far removed from it.
So this is maybe a little bit of a curveball, I don't know, but I was wondering if you could speak on enchantment in Lewis, the whole idea of an enchanted world. So we kind of tiptoed around this earlier when you were talking about Narnia, and we're talking about it just from European or an Anglo context. But in terms of enchantment, I want to put this forward as kind of an objection, playing devil's advocate a little bit. Because Lewis is as popular as he is, why hasn't that seemed to have an effect? There's lots of people that read Lewis, yet it seems a lot of the time that they appreciate the story, but still the imagination has not been converted. So it's like, wow, it's a really good author, but there's oftentimes it just doesn't seem to click. So why is it that Lewis has, do you think, and again, we didn't, haven't talked about this before, so I am genuinely curious about, if you have any thoughts on this, why is it for the popularity of Lewis across such a broad spectrum of people, but yet he's used for so many things? I think it was Joe Rigney who described Lewis as, being the last exit out of atheism. People say, yeah, I'm with Lewis, and that's like the step right before they apostatize, and there's something credible in Lewis they feel like they're connecting with as they leave orthodoxy. Also, there's there's people who are into, whether it's classical education or recovering the medieval world and all of that, and say, yes, yeah, I plant my flag here. But in their theology, they don't seem to catch the enchantment that makes all of this possible. It doesn't transfer into their theology, their liturgy, their practice of the faith. So it seems like to me, I'll put this as a kind of semi-thesis out there and let you see what you want to do with it, but it seems like unless you can get into the enchantment of what Lewis is talking about, you miss the bridge. And the enchanting worldview is what allows you to cross the bridge with Lewis back to that other side of the chasm you were talking about. Am I right about that? Am I wrong? Is there something I'm missing? But why is there such broad appeal for Lewis, but it doesn't seem proportionally that he changes the imagination, but that the enchantment seems to fall through?
Wow. It's a good question. In a world of people who've read a lot of Lewis, I don't know why that hasn't translated into more, I guess, positive outcomes. Like, even if like you say, the people of even our own generation who kind of grew up with Lewis, they have not turned that into anything deeply effective from a cultural level. But also, I don't know a lot of people who, one, have really seen and practiced the medieval model and utilized that at their level, and maybe there's where there's sort of the other leg of Lewis's influence is that not only is he an Anglican traditionalist, but also a medievalist. And if you kind of understand some aspects like the Christian imagination and, being able to sort of light that on fire a little bit in some people, if that never actually translates to going further up and further in, if let me borrow that phrase, into what leads to the imagination being able to take place, then it's always just going to be a sort of a competing story that's out there, a competing storyline thread with whatever modern story that rises up and meets some level with you. It's always going to just be like at the story level. It's not going to get down inside. It's not going to change the way that you live your life. And I know that this is true even of popular Christian culture today, and I can only relate to this in terms of kind of the CCM, the Christian contemporary music industry. But there was a trend that you could see about the types of music people would listen to as they're heading out away from Christianity. Perhaps you've seen this before. The same kind of thing, last exit out, that you could sort of see people going, they're wanting something that's initially with nuance. It's not nuance. It's not something. So Lewis feels like that because he talks in a way that feels so common. It's like reaching into one's own life and experience. He's an everyman. He doesn't come off as deeply academic at times, and so he feels like he's doing the work of translating academics to you. And so that feels like people can really trust and rely on him. And so there is this sense in which, like you can see why people have a Lewis love, even if they hate all the things that he also loved. And they hate the faith that he's part of, but they like the way he said it. But it's just latching on to this very surface level thing. It's just one of the elements without actually going in and seeing what the cause of this, what generated his ability to kind of convey a message that they enjoyed, but they have no idea where it's coming from.
Yeah. I also, no, I'm sorry, real quick. I just want. It's just constantly interesting to me to just see so many Lewis fans that you might, we talked about the hierarchy in Lewis. And yet you'll have people who are like, I'm an egalitarian. I hate hierarchy, but I love Lewis. It's like they're not picking up on the hierarchy that comes through Lewis. Or I don't. You could apply the same, whether it's monarchy or class structure, those kinds of things built into Lewis. But I hate those things. I couldn't even imagine them. Or I couldn't imagine liturgy. That's just so weird to me in church. Formalism, even though it's built into Lewis and his worldview. So, but in the same with the enchantment, like the formation of my theology kind of is on an Enlightenment kind of model. So the idea that there could be something going on beyond the physical, whether it's your doctrine of the Eucharist or baptism or whatever, that kind of enchantment that makes that possible. I love Lewis, but I can't think in those categories beyond the physical. So it's just an interesting disconnect that, how much love there is for Lewis, yet what's the problem there that it doesn't quite translate. So that, I just thought I'd, pick your brain on that a little bit, where that disconnect was. But CJ, sorry to cut you off.
Could I before CJ comes, could I just say, the question that we should ask, I guess, is, what do they teach in these schools, right? That's the real question here. The Professor Kirk question. What are they teaching you? Like, how do you not have categories for this? He asks the Pevensies when they tell him of Lucy's story, and he kind of presents like how do you not understand kind of formal logic here? But it's sort of one of those aspects that if you don't have all of the things built, then that surface level story is not going to do much to you. And like even your enchantment, it only goes so deep. And I think that just gets back to having some sort of foundation in the way that he had the foundation that he did and how that turned out for him. It's kind of trying in some small way, not sycophantic about it, but we're trying to mimic how to educate a person the way that he was educated. And that just goes back to, having to educate children in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's two sides to this coin. Like, on one hand, there's the everyday person. I mean, the Chronicles of Narnia have sold so many copies, right? It's very popular. So on one hand, the question is, how have these people not be convinced that the paradigm that he puts forth is actually a meaningful solution to what ails them. And I think that the answer to that is that, the flesh does what the spirit knows is wrong, and, these two are in constant tension. And the pull of modernity is so overwhelming that people don't have the strength, the spiritual capacity to overcome, modern propaganda and all of the pulls, the various ways in which all of modern life tugs at every single one of our senses. And, C.S. Lewis offers something that is sort of a temporary escape from that. But at the end of the day, you have to put the book down and you have to go back to your life. And I don't think a lot of people have the opportunity. And this is one of the tragedies, I think, of the modern age, is we're afforded no opportunity to get out of it. I mean, the three of us and people listening to this and handful of other people, they have been able to, by the grace of God, salvage their minds so that they're not corrupted by worldly things in an overwhelming way. That's why we believe the things that we believe, and that's why we, operate in the way that we operate and live the way that we live. But like the vast majority of Western people live totally destitute lives, and so I don't think that living in that world, you could mentally just, put it all aside. And many people don't have the opportunity to do that. And then on the other side, it's the question that continues to perplex me today, and it's more of a general problem. Why are the people that saturate themselves in C.S. Lewis and Tolkien or T.S. Eliot or so many, even the people that run the Anglican Church or the Roman Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church today, why are all of them so left-wing? Like, I literally am having a really hard time coming up with an answer to that. Why are they so Jacobin in every single one of their cultural opinions? And C.S. Lewis is someone that would absolutely be outraged by the things that these people believe. And yet, like Martin Luther, can you imagine if Martin Luther saw what the people who operate with a denomination under his name, can you believe what he would say? Like, I think his reaction would be more visceral than it was against the Roman Catholic Church. So how is this possible? And I don't have an answer to that one.
I've grown to see it as the book of our time. I think it's a book that we have to read to sort of just rearrange our own mental furniture and understand the time in which we live, so people to wake up to the time in which we live. That hideous strength. I'll just continue to plug it until everyone has read it. But there you have this exact sort of problem on display. And have you guys, Jared, you've read it. CJ, you know what I'm talking. You read this book, the hideous strength. I thought you referenced it before. So yeah. So and for listeners who haven't, read it, you have to read it. I'm going to spoil just like a little bit of it, but like one of the main concepts that comes on display is just like 2/3 of the way through the book, we find out like what some of the goings on are all about. So you've got the nice, right? This kind of evil, the evil corporate institution who's coming on and buying this property, and they're buying this property. It's not totally clear why in the beginning. It's a college where Mark works, and they're trying to incorporate these professors, some of them anyway, into this organization. And what anyone does at NICE is unclear. No one knows where they stand. No one knows who they're under or who they're over. There's this modern life is on display right there in this picture. But we come to find out that the thing that the NICE are after are the land upon which the college sits, because, well, Merlin is there. And they've read the old stories, and they think that Merlin is the solution to the plan that they're trying to do, sort of the rationalist perspective, scientism. They think that we need to attain Merlin and he's some kind of weapon. And so they know the ground. They want the college not for the people. They make it sound like they want it for the minds who are teaching there, but it's not. Those are just going to become cogs and part of that machine. Then the other aspect of this is really interesting for England in particular and for Lewis is that the NICE, they've got no connection to the land. They have no ideals founded on the idea of what the land is, which is this idea, ancient idea. It's Arthurian, Logos. They have no connection to that either. They are literally securing the college to mine it for its resources, to take from the ground what it can provide them. Merlin, a tool that they're going to use to achieve their scientific ends. But the thing of it is they've misread the stories. They've read the stories, they know what Merlin is capable of, but they don't understand him. They fail to understand that Merlin is not a neutral force. His powers are tied to moral and spiritual order, and that opposes the very ideology that Nice is promoting. And so his power is not rationalistic. It's more like a primal, ancient force, a kind of force that comes from it's powered by Celtic Britain itself. So Merlin ultimately sides with the carriers on of Logos, those who are defending the sacred natural order in that book. In fact, when he is awakened, he instinctively recognizes Ransom as the Pendragon, the rightful leader in the divine order. But Ransom knows the stories, and the Nice know the stories. They're reading the same books, but they're misapplying them. They don't know how to use them. They don't understand them enough. They've only got the surface level of one aspect. But like you said, when you're bombarded by the life that you're in, that one aspect might enchant you temporarily, but if the rest of your body is disenchanted, it's not going to work. If you're having a Big Mac and French fries, the Diet Coke is not going to help. That's not going to save you in this moment. And I think that's why, the modern reading C.S. Lewis, we're so far from where we need to be that's not.
We're mining Lewis like mining Merlin, using him, having read the books, using him for our ends. He seems to be to CJ's question, he seems to be a mild-mannered guy who's an academic and has a way with words. Therefore, the leaders of these institutions can mine that aspect of Lewis, and use him as a tool for forwarding, theologies that are completely different. I think that's the connection you're making, which is a good one, I think.
That is a good one. I like that a lot. I mean, it's like, it's like with Aslan, like one of the things that we learn, early on. I remember this as a kid, that Aslan is not safe, but they want C.S. Lewis to be, because he sounds safe, or they want the safe side of C.S. Lewis. They don't want all the wars that he absorbed in the making of his worldview. They just want the nice, leisurely academic, and it's something that they can be comfortable with, and it doesn't have to threaten their proclivities.
Yeah, this is where I think you need to take the line. I can't remember if this was actually I think it was just in the movie, not in the book, about the "don't quote the deep magic to me," which, so I think that's where that line really comes in. It is still of practical application.
Yeah, I think the key would be to go back to the enchanted world of the medieval mind, seeing a sort of orderly, structured, hierarchical world, that an ordered cosmos, and then from there building back in some of the other aspects of the parts of the books that we like, or the ones that are resonating with us. Those become truer. Those become more real when we see what they came from, or where they're sort of their images themselves. They're images that have been discarded, and now when we look to them, they can do something for us. But until we know what they did initially, they have no meaning, and that it's just another sort of source of being lost, or another source of which you think you know something that you don't really know, and it becomes this sort of like, I've read this and I've added this to my collection, but there's no cohesion. There's no way that all of these things, like you say, can coexist. You can't love Lewis but hate hierarchy. You can't have these things coexist, but people don't even realize sometimes that those things are in conflict. There's no structure, there's no order, things aren't built on what they do. It's like a car. No one knows how a car works. They only know when it doesn't work. That's it. Like, you don't know, you just know that it takes you from one point to the other, but when there's a disconnect somewhere along the way, it's only then that you realize that something doesn't work, but you don't even know how to describe to the mechanic what's not working, other than try to recreate the noise that it makes. And so I think, until there's some more teaching or educating being done, I do feel that reading Lewis probably for the right kind of person would still be helpful, but for the wrong kind of person, I said, it's just going to be, I use my principles against you. I use your principles against you because they benefit me, but I won't take any of the things that those came from for myself. I don't believe in any of them myself, but I'll use them against you. That's sort of what he ends up becoming. He becomes a sort of spokeshole for anyone who likes the safe, as you said, CJ, the safe side of what he offers, and then now he's being used against you, and you don't even understand all of the things that he said before that, or you've rejected them.
Well, it's kind of funny because this actually plays it sort of into another question that we were going to get to. One of the characteristics of the current political and cultural situation is we use words and phrases and frameworks that are extremely important to the making of our world. So take a concept like liberty. I mean, liberty played a very key role in the Anglo sphere. Political liberty is very important. And yet right now we're basically using words like liberty to justify some of the most disgusting behaviors that mankind has ever conceived. And it's all done in the name of liberty. In other words, we want to take this foundation of Western society, this pillar. I mean, going back to the Magna Carta, freedom or liberty of some sort, played a role. And yet now, anyone who denies LGBT rights or whatever, they are denying somebody else's liberty. And so all of the things that are so important to us, and it's not even just liberty. It's like rights. It's religious freedom. It's free speech. All of these things that are so core to our world are flipped on their head and used to continue us down the very path that's now destroying us. And I don't even just mean destroying us nationally or something, but people are literally living in emotional and spiritual turmoil, destitution. They are people. We live in people. We don't want to admit this because we want to be very optimistic about Trump and how exciting everything is and America's back. But I think deep down there is a lot of pain in this world, and in order to address that, we can't just have increased economic production. We have to actually dig much deeper and challenge the very assumptions of our entire world. So I guess that's a long way of getting us to our next question was, what relation does secularism have to medievalism, and is it even possible to go back down the same bridge that we've come down over the last 150 years?
In some ways, even for myself, it seems impossible. It seems like there's no way back. We have too far to go. But at the same time, I think of our institutions and our families. The family is itself an institution. Going back to some of the very basic things that you can do. There's so much that you cannot do externally. There's so much that you have to work on within your own house. And I think for me, that's where most of the energy that I'm spending, it has to be there. And that's going to necessarily in some ways limit my ability to financially be successful. But that's not where I'm ultimately putting my grandest hopes in that, because I've seen people who are successful. I've seen people who are doing great and have great business ideas, and their families are falling apart. And I can't accuse them of doing anything wrong in particular, but I can't myself, when push comes to shove, make that choice to go one particular direction if it seems like it's going to negatively affect some other aspect, which is, in my view, far more important. But in regards to going back to the medieval way, one aspect of where you can do that is sort of kind of going to that monk sort of lifestyle a little bit, but also the ways that you can do the small, simple things. England as a place, England as an idea, there are a lot of those components which are themselves helpful to make the type of person that would be a bulwark against the modern age. Thinking about even some of the very generic things that we think about English. One of the comments about English cuisine is how boring and bland it is. There's a joke about the English rule of cooking is cook till gray. That's when you know it's done. But like there's something about that. Even Lewis's own taste. He was notoriously not highfalutin in his palate. He wanted simple, comfort-focused food. And there's something I like to cook myself. It's something I enjoy doing. I like to cook. But there is something that always kills me when I've made a huge Christmas feast of all of these. The ingredients list is massive. My fridge is packed out, and it just can't beat something that is extremely easy to do and small. It's 5 ingredients, and there's something about like the time that you invested in this could have been spent elsewhere. Like building up in your own house and not trying to produce something that's amazing. The pub, the life of the pub. We're not physically gathering. People don't physically gather anymore. We're digitally meeting now. In general, people are disconnected from their neighbors. They're more connected in some ways to people who are ideologically in their same neighborhood, but their physical neighborhood, they have almost no interaction with those people. And the pub was the source of life. It was the gathering of souls happened in the pub. And like that's something that I think we've lost. Direct communication. Writing letters. Lewis was known for his incredible amount of correspondence that he did. He's like Jeffersonian in his dedication to his desk, hours a night to write letters to sometimes kids and people who wrote a response to something that he published a decade before, but he saw the value of person-to-person communication. And I think also another thing that I find that Lewis is a voice to for the modern life is that precision of language. We're quick to, and I myself am guilty of this, so I'm admitting it myself. We're quick to respond. We have to have a hot take for everything. We have to respond when something gets put out there, and then I instantaneously do it. And there is a time and a place for the keyboard warrior activity. I think it's a valuable contribution, but ultimately what I find is that has come at the expense of being very well read. Really actually doing something that he did, which was the kind of traditional rules of rhetoric that we would ask our students to do, which is, can you restate your arguments, your enemy's argument in the way that they would state it, that they would find it to be true. He was just very good at that. And if people misquoted him or misunderstood or misrepresented him, he would go after them. He would say, I didn't say that word. Here's what I said. Here's what this word means. He was kind of pedantic about this, but like there's a way to go about one's life, and there's a way to focus, major on the majors, and do that at your own level in a way that I don't know that as a society that it's going to happen. I'm torn between the idea that we're a grassroots movement and we just do this in our own homes and everything's going to turn out okay somewhere along the way because we've read the right books and we have these right principles. And also sometimes you really need someone to come in there and smash things up. And Lewis himself would say that. I think that the book Paralandra is that case where Ransom has done the observation, he's done the study in the first book of the Ransom trilogy. He's gone to the out of the Silent Planet, and he's come back home and he's learned something there, and now when he goes to Paralandra, his job is to be pugilistic. His job is to fight. So I think that there are times and places when there is a goal to do that, but ultimately I think the quiet internal life of home and making that the area which you master first before you take it outside is maybe at this point the only way that I feel myself capable of making any type of effect on society. I don't have high hopes of all of the other ideals and starting a school with medieval principles, because again we're bringing in people who don't live that life in their own homes. So but if we can model in some way what that looks like in our own home, that might be able to spill over, and then having people into your home to observe that lifestyle. Maybe this is a way that people can start to see a difference between the way that they live and the way that you do. But otherwise, I have no real major advice for how to live in modern society. I'm myself finding arrows and thorns from every side too.
If I could follow up on that, take it maybe a slightly different direction, and that is, we have this idea of liberalism, which is, if everybody just kind of choose how they want to live, they can kind of create this own little world for themselves. But as we've been talking here, the idea of trying to recover, the medieval world, the world that animates Lewis, and we've come to the point to say, well, it's kind of impossible because we all live in the real world, right? And so how do you go back? And the reason is you can't really go back is because the governing assumptions of society under liberalism says that you can't create a world outside of your little house. So you're content. You can believe whatever you want as long as you keep it within four walls, and you can create your own little world there. But what we're learning is that just because you have access to classical education, or because you have some family practice, it's going to be increasingly at odds with the real world that you're living in. You're going to find that the schedules are such that they don't allow you to live that kind of life that Lewis is describing. And so I think one of the things that this is not by any means a practical solution. It's just something we need to start creating a category for, is having people in power that can create conditions that allow families to try to recover that life. Because I think there's a lot of families that say, yeah, we're going to just do our best, but the clock goes off, the alarm goes off because there's something that we've got to do next. And so you could say, just work harder, families, work harder to have this time, just turn the TV off, or just give this up, give up this for your kids, give up that. Or just make a little extra money so you can live that life, which is increasingly hard to do, especially within the economic conditions we're dealing with inflation and all of that. And so I think one of the things we need to do is Christians need to develop a concept of what it looks like to exercise power, and not simply to exercise power to say the goal is, if I get in charge, I'm going to let everybody do their own thing with no interference whatsoever, so you can create your own little world, your own little meaning of the universe and existence, to quote Justice Kennedy from back in the 1990s, but rather to allow the space where you can recreate a world. And I think, as long as we keep it at the level of saying, well, I'm going to try to create my little world, and I don't know what we're going to do beyond that. And honestly, I don't either, personally. I don't have a master plan for it. But I think the highest we've ever looked and hoped for is just being allowed to create our own little worlds. And again, I think this is why some of what Lewis and what we talk about enchantment and all of this misses us. Because we get a taste of it, it's an escape for us a little bit, but then the real world calls. And so in actually establishing the kinds of disciplines that are needed to make a lifestyle, which makes a culture, which makes a world, we're going to have to develop categories for thinking about how to exercise power in such a way as to relieve some of the pressures on families that are trying to recover this way of thinking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, this is something, it's like, so much of our instinct in terms of what needs to be done is always like, well, if the government would just get out of our way, then X, Y, and Z, and we could do this. If we could end the Department of Education, then homeschooling could, you could thrive once again, and every parent could, educate its children with all of these great, like, iPad apps that have all of this education on it. It's like, what you're doing is you're adding fuel to a problem, and regulation hasn't had any benefit, but just the mindset of constantly innovating ourselves out of perceived constraints of history, I think is a much more general problem that you really, there's no individual response to this. And there's no like policy initiative either that can respond to this. These are things that are civilizational in nature. And so, like I don't want to toot my own horn, but just the fact that we're doing something where we gather a bunch of families into a historically depleted area and bringing in Christianity for the first time in a long time, bringing in energy, and you do need some sort of material wealth to do stuff like that. But just the fact that we're doing something within a 4-county region, I think is one of those examples of something that can be done. And we all agree doing this that the payoff is not going to be seen by us. It's something that's going to have to be inherited by our grandchildren, because these are 60-year developments. I mean, think about the sexual revolution that we see around us, the fruit of the sexual revolution. But the revolutionaries in the 1960s that were architecting this, they never lived to see the promised land. They died on the mountain like Moses did. And so, like, we have to be thinking on that sort of time scale. And that is really difficult. It's really difficult to take a high time preference society and retrain it to be a low time preference society. But all you can do is start with yourself and some other families that maybe are committed as you are. So that's my only word on that, because I can't come up with anything else.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking in terms of your project there in Tennessee. Why you have to be very intentional about the community you're trying to create. It's not just here, let's pursue another land of opportunity. Everybody, you have to be careful in terms of how you are constructing that community. It can't just be a free for all, or you're going to end up right back where you started, right? So making cultures, while it does start from the bottom up, the individual, the family, these are all things that have to be done on that very most local level. There's got to be certain conditions in place about what kind of behaviors are acceptable in this new community, what kind of aesthetic is acceptable culturally in this community, and we're going to give you space to fit within those bounds. But outside of those bounds, there's certain things that are just not going to be acceptable in this community, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about is, looking beyond just household disciplines or individual disciplines, but even at the political level, creating a kind of new consensus about what the customs are for that community, what's going to be acceptable is part of the political project we need to think through.
Yeah, so I think that's about the end of our conversation here. I know we have some other things to do. Micah, if you could just one last thing, if you have like a book or two that you would most recommend to people, what might those be?
Well, you should definitely buy my forthcoming book from the Libertarian Christian Institute. We're publishing my book on C.S. Lewis's libertarian. If C.S. Lewis were alive today, he would be a libertarian. No, I'm just kidding. You should read.
Don't give me a heart attack.
You should read of Lewis, of course. If you haven't read the Ransom trilogy, you should do that post haste. But then of Lewis's other books, so The Discarded Image is a book that should give you the framework necessary. Like you were saying at the end, CJ, we're not going to see the real fruit of this, immediately. Not in our lifetimes, probably not even in our children's lifetimes. But these types of changes, or these things that we're going to make, those, like all good things, are inherited. Lewis inherited a tradition himself. It came to him, and he could just do what he could with what he had. And so we are dealing with the situation we have. We're going to have to put our own effect on it as we can, but all we can work with is the thing that we've been given. And that framework is given in The Discarded Image. And I think that's just a great way to see Lewis's medieval model on display and how he employs it. And then, I think Michael Ward's book is still a valuable resource for even the Lewis lover or the person who's read Narnia. I think it's a book that pays lots of dividends. It opens one's mind up to the cosmos. It did that for me. Even elements of science that I didn't totally understand before about the Ptolemaic universe, now I understand. And so Ward was just a masterful at crossing those boundaries. So I think Michael Ward's Planet Narnia, and then from Lewis, reading his fiction, That Hideous Strength is the book for our time, and The Discarded Image. I think these would be alone, if you read those in 2025, you would find yourself more prepared to deal in some ways with your own home in the modern age.
Well, great, Micah. I appreciate your time today. And yes, everyone, of course, pick up those books if you haven't yet. And, we're on YouTube and other RSS audio, podcatchers. So make sure you go and like and subscribe to us there and share the podcast. This is the end of episode 5, and we will see you in another week. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week on Canterbury Trails. If you like what you hear, we'd appreciate your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing on whatever platform you're hearing us. Stay tuned for more weekly episodes, and we'll see you next time on the Canterbury Trails.